This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Rosa, and this episode is with writer and poet Vianney Harelly. She is from Tijuana, Mexico, and she writes the most beautiful poems about inner child healing, transgenerational healing of trauma. She talks about her parents and their story and their wounds, and she is just so open and so vulnerable and such an amazing, amazing writer. I just love her work and everything that she has shared with the world. And in this episode, we dive a little deeper into her story, and I get to ask her about her creative process and what inspires her to keep going, what motivates her to continue sharing her gifts with the world. I am sure you will love this episode as much as I did. Before we go into the actual interview, I want to remind you all to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so you can be notified every time a new episode is dropped. I also want to encourage you all to please leave me a review on Apple Podcast. As you know, this really helps boost our presence on this platform, and I am so appreciative of your reviews. I read each and every one of them. I also welcome any emails or comments. I always provide my email in the show notes, so if you have any questions for me, if you want to suggest a guest or nominate yourself to be a guest, feel free to reach out. You can also find me on Instagram, send me a DM, and we can definitely connect there. I'm also on YouTube and TikTok. As you know, this podcast is also being shared on YouTube. So if you're more of a visual learner, make sure to check out the episode of the interview on YouTube. I have both audio versions and video versions on YouTube as well. Now, I need to give a brief disclaimer that this episode is not meant to treat or diagnose any physical or mental health condition. This episode does not substitute for healthcare or mental health services. Guests have a right to share their opinion and perspective, and this does not constitute an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Vianney Harelly. Take a listen. Hi, welcome, Vianney, to the podcast. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, thank you. And so to start off, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, just for the folks that are not familiar with your work, who you are, where you're from, and the healing work that you do?
Yes, so my name is Vianney Harelly. And for those that ask me if that's my first and last name, that is not my first and last name. That's my first and middle name. And the reason why I don't use my last name, ni el de mi mamá, ni de mi papá, is because I just, at this point in my life and my healing journey, I don't feel a very strong connection with either family, not necessarily my mom or my dad, but their sides of the family. I don't feel a strong connection, and I also don't feel supported by them. So I just decided to honor myself, yo solita, my inner child, and in honor of that, like my inner child, my inner teen, and my present self, I just use my first and middle name. And I call myself una artista fronteriza because I am from Tijuana, San Diego. I go back and forth. I was born in San Diego, but I went back literally the day after I was born to Tijuana. Both of my parents are from Tijuana, and I lived there for 18 years until I graduated high school. And in between those times, I went to middle school and high school in San Diego. So I was crossing the border every day to go to school. And then I moved to San Francisco after high school to go to college, where I got my bachelor's in creative writing. And then I had to move to Tijuana because of the pandemic. So I lived there for another 2 years. Y ahorita vivo en San Diego, but I go back and forth because my mom lives in Tijuana. Y mi mamá no tiene papeles, so she cannot cross to the US. So I try to visit her as much as I can to see her. And yeah, so that's about me. And then about my writing, I've been writing since I was in 6th grade. We can talk more about that later, but I have been in this writing path for about 16 years now. So it's been a long, long journey. And I started my self-publishing journey in 2022, so last year. And I write my poetry now. I always say they are love letters in the form of poetry, and they are love letters, love outside of the romantic. So, love towards my family, towards my community, my country, my culture, my healing process, my inner child, and then my past, present, and future self.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think when you shared the part of you being in elementary school or being young and coming to school and crossing the border every day, I feel that so many people that I know personally can relate to that experience. It is a very unique experience.
Yes.
for those that did that, and I have friends that so when you said that, I immediately thought of my friends and when they were little, and just every day, they would wake up super early, get back home really late, and so that's a whole identity in and of itself, right? That living in the border in Tijuana or Tecate, I knew people from Tecate, and then crossing the border every day.
Yeah.
How has that, just to go back on to that part, how has that being, you said fronteriza, artista fronteriza, right? So how has that part of you contributed to your creativity and where you're at right now with the work that you do?
I feel like the most obvious one is the Spanglish that I use in my poetry. A lot of people that kind of don't understand that experience always comment on my videos, or they ask me like, why do you use both languages at the same time? Porque hablas en inglés y español. Escoge uno. Or they're like, actually today I got a comment saying, te ves bien ridícula hablando en los dos idiomas al mismo tiempo. Yeah. And
Goodness,
so
people, someone that you knew, or just
no, like a random comment on a video, that I posted. It's always random people that say these things. And I know it's because they don't understand it. Like you said, it's a very unique experience. And I always talk about this with my friends too that are also fronterizas, that it is a very specific experience that only people who go through it understand it. Like the whole is not just about crossing a physical border, but there's also so many emotional aspects to it. I have a poem that I wrote in high school, my junior year of high school, called Ser Latina en Dos Mundos, where I talk about how to me, how wild and even like surrealist it felt to be crossing this border and kind of shifting identities every single day. So getting, like you said, getting up very early and then crossing to a whole nother country. You're in a whole different country, and me having to speak this other language that when I first started going to school in the US, which was 6th grade, like the middle of 6th grade, to me, it was this foreign language and I couldn't even read a children's book in English. So having to speak that language and then crossing back and then speaking to my mom and my dad in Spanish and kind of shifting those identities. And I would always say that I felt like when I was crossing the border, I was living a part of me back home and back in Tijuana. Because of that shift, I felt like something was lost. The same way I feel that when I have to translate some of my emotions in my work, I feel like something is lost, como que una esencia, una parte de mí se pierde. Por eso es que there are certain phrases that I don't translate and that I can't. It's not because I don't want to, but it's because there are certain emotions that have no translation. Porque para mí, siento que el lenguaje, el inglés es como muy frío, very distant, very cold. And that's not me, that's not home, that's not my culture. So I feel like being from a frontera, and constantly having that feeling of, oh, well, who am I? And going through that identity crisis from a very young age of who am I? Where am I from? What language do I speak? ¿Qué máscara me pongo hoy? ¿Qué personaje juego hoy? Because also even crossing that border and this whole thing of like border patrols and the questions that they ask. And I remember like me and my sister having to say like, we lived in San Diego, but we were just visiting Tijuana, when in reality we were living in Tijuana. So that whole like, no sé, como que tienes un personaje, el que te tienes que aprender, el que tienes que practicar.
Yeah.
So I feel like it still plays a role in my writing and in my art
No,
today.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's so, I think folks that, you know, I can understand a little bit because when I was in college, or, you know, in my 20s, I traveled to Ensenada a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
I would go there so often. And I would get asked these questions, and I would always get nervous, and I would always, um, there's this aspect of being questioned about your identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's literally who you are, why did you go to Mexico? Why are you coming back? You know, vice versa.
Yeah.
So I can in that anxiety that you feel, I can't,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did it as an adult, but I can't even imagine how it is to do it every day as a child, right? Or
Yeah.
as someone so young. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was talking about this to a friend for an article that she's writing about how being an immigrant or crossing borders affects your inner child. And I was talking specifically about this, about how from a young age. So I started going to school in the US in 6th grade. My sister was in 5th grade. So I do remember my parents telling us, okay, this is what you need to say if they ask, where do you live? If they ask, what were you doing in Mexico? If they ask this, say this. So it was like a constant thing every single morning of having that responsibility as a child of like, okay, this is what I need to say. And if I mess it up, I could put my, you know, my family in big trouble. And that's a big responsibility for a kid.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, are you familiar with Gloria Anzaldua's work? I mean,
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I wasn't, I mean, I became familiar with her work recently. I mean, within the last couple of years. And honestly, for the first time, I was able to pinpoint what, you know, in terms of an identity culturally, you know, ni de aquí, ni de allá, but being just that in and of itself is an identity,
Yeah.
right? The
Mm-hmm,
fact that you belong to both.
mm-hmm.
And for me, that was an eye opener, you know, and I'm talking about being in my 30s, right? And realizing this. Um, when did this, well, you know, well, let me go back a little bit. When you talk about the Spanglish
Mm-hmm.
and being able to embrace that and being able to, you know, people comment and just kind of understanding where they're coming from, but also being very sure of where you're at. How did that evolve for you? And what shifted in terms of how you were able to identify yourself and be so at ease and embrace the Spanglish or the,
Mm-hmm.
you know, both languages, both identities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the language in my writing, um, it is also a reflection of my evolution as a person and in my identity as well. So my writing, when I first started writing, it was in Spanish, all Spanish, and starting to write since I was little, and I would write songs in my journal and in my diaries. In Spanish. And then when I started college in San Francisco, I went to SF State. I wanted to major in creative writing, but in Spanish, but the university didn't have that option. They only had it for the English department because of budgeting reasons. And they also didn't think that a lot of people would want to major in that language for some reason. And so I had to do it as part of the English department. And I came in, you know, with my writing in Spanish, and I came in, you know, being very proud of that and being very proud because I also didn't take into account how different my experience and out of the ordinary it would be up north in, you know, the Bay Area, because being in Tijuana/San Diego, it's very common to see people, you know, crossing every day, to have people that speak Spanish as, you know, their first language. Or I went to a high school in San Diego, Southwest High, that's very close to the border. So like 90% of the students spoke Spanish, the teachers as well. So then moving to San Francisco, I thought that it was going to be the same, but it wasn't. It was a complete opposite. So I remember being in my classes and having my writing in Spanish. and having professors that asked me to, translate my work. And so then I started tapping a little bit into the Spanglish, because I was like, okay, I guess, because this is for a grade, like I need to do this to graduate, to pass this class. So I'll start writing a little bit in English, because by then I already knew English very well, how to speak it and read it. But some phrases I would leave in Spanish for the same reason of I just didn't want to translate, because I felt like those phrases deserve to stay in Spanish.
Wow.
But my professors, my classmates would constantly ask me to translate. And I had some professors that would even write notes saying like, oh, write in English, like reminders to write it in English. And so then I just got tired of it, of having to constantly translate for my classmates, to having to explain some of the cultural and political parts of my poetry, because it exists in my poems. It's not just about, me, but there's so many cultural layers that I feel like are so specific and are so personal to people. And that's why a lot of Latinas can relate to my poetry, because it's also cultural. And so then I was like, okay, I'll just write in English. And that's when I started writing in English. And that's when I went through like a whole identity crisis of like, who am I? And I started reading Gloria Anzaldua in college as well. Started reading her work of ni de aquí ni de allá. So I was like, okay, am I English or am I Spanish in language terms? Am I, a U.S. citizen? I am a U.S. citizen. So am I American or am I Mexican? Like all these things that I was wondering. And it wasn't until after that I started kind of reconciling the two and realizing that I could be both. And I could, be both the person that I am in Tijuana, Mexico, and the person that I am in the U.S. And not in my poem, the Ser Latina en Dos Mundos, there's a line that says, aprendí a partirme en dos y no sentir dolor. Knowing that I can have multiple identities, multiple, memories, languages. And that's when I was like, okay, my work will be in Spanglish. Y de ahí no me van a mover, aunque la gente me diga ridícula, que me digan que no le entienden. Yeah. And there's been people that tell me that, or that say that, people that speak either or of the languages, that tell me to choose a language. And so it's also part of that, of tal vez ni de aquí ni de allá, pero soy de aquí y de allá, y también mis idiomas, también voy a hacer español, inglés, y no tengo que elegir uno, and that's okay. And I feel like whoever can relate to it will relate to it.
Yeah. Oh my God. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to go back a little bit to, how did you find your voice as a poet, as a writer? How were you able to tap into that gift that you have to put such beautiful words on paper and express it in such a way?
Thank you. So I feel like it was something that I discovered from an early age. And I talk about this a lot and I share this story a lot, but it's because I want people to see that when something is meant for you, it is just meant for you. And I tell people, I may have found it when I was in 6th grade. You may find it when you are a teenager. You may find it when you're an adult, when you're in your late 40s. You never know, but you'll find it. It will come to you naturally. So for me, it was, I was, like I said, I had my diaries and journals, just because I've always been a very quiet kid. And I was always very observant in my family, in my culture, my city. So yo siempre le decía a mi psicóloga, yo cuando pienso en mi yo de chiquita, I think of myself as a secondary character and someone who's just watching and observing people going through things, and my family going through things, dealing with things. And so because I didn't want to add to what my family was going through, I would just write in my diary. And that's where I would write my emotions, my thoughts, my observations, my feelings. And so then when I was in 6th grade, I think my mom told my teacher that I liked writing because there was a writing contest, and my teacher, his name is Mr. Rosillo, and I will always mention him because he is the reason why I discovered my purpose. And I always mention him because to me, that's the importance of having teachers and mentors that believe in you and that will help you and support you. And that's also, to me, that's considered chosen family as well. Absolutely. Having someone who, roots for you, que te apoya. Mm-hmm. So he asked me to participate in the contest, but initially I said no because I didn't know how to read English. My first year of 6th grade, he asked me to read a children's book that they were reading, and I couldn't understand the book. So I started crying and I ran out of the classroom. So I was like, if I can't even read a sentence on a children's book, how can I participate in this contest. It was an essay contest. So I was like, there's no way I can write a 5-paragraph essay. And he said, I'll help you. We'll use Google Translate. We'll use a dictionary. Like, just participate. He really believed in me. So I did it and I turned it in. And 2 weeks later, he calls my mom and he tells her that I won the contest. And the day of the ceremony, I remember that I was reading my piece. Ahí como pude así con mi inglés todo mucho. And I remember reading my essay and then I look up. It was this big ceremony. It was in, for those that are from San Diego, it was in Mission Valley. It was like this big room and it was full of, my family was there, my teacher, but also a lot of strangers, like hundreds of strangers. And so, because the contest was elementary, middle school, high school, and adult level. So there was a lot of people. And I was reading my work and then I look up and I see people crying in the room. I see like my mom crying. I see my dad con los ojos llorosos. I see strangers that I don't even know that were crying. And that's the moment that I realized, like, well, my words have some kind of power and strength to be able to move these people that don't even know me, don't know my story, because my essay was about my mom. So I was like, they don't even know me or my mom. And they're crying, they're emotional. And so then that's when I told myself, okay, like there's something there and I want to explore it. And I want to dedicate my life to this, to be a writer. And so from there, I haven't stopped. Like I've been writing ever since and doing things towards my writing career. So it's been about 16 years.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious, how has your own healing, emotional healing, and how has that evolved with your work as a writer, with your career? Have you noticed that they go hand in hand, or what have you noticed from your career and your own healing?
Yeah, I do realize that they do, like, without me even trying to make it about healing, or I didn't even write these books to like, these will be for me to heal. That wasn't my intention, but it just happened naturally. And my writing has been through a lot of, I would say like genres or style of writing, because when I was in college, my writing was about politics in Mexico. Y hablaba mucho como de pues lo que estaba pasando en México, era en el tiempo que Enrique Peña Nieto era presidente, so I would write a lot of poems talking about Enrique Peña Nieto. I would go to a lot of protests. I was reading a lot of and I was a lot in a college courses about politics and not just Mexican politics, but Latina politics. So I was very involved in it. So my writing was strictly about that. But it was also a time in which I was going through a lot with my family, my own romantic life, financial life. It was my lowest point. So I was focusing on politics kind of to distract myself from my own, I guess, my own wounds and my own feelings and my own. I was also very suicidal during those times. So I had to focus on some things, and it was politics. And back then I didn't even know about inner child or generational trauma. I did not know those existed. And so then when I started therapy I actually have the date on my arm. I have it right here. I got it tattooed. It's my first day that I went to therapy. So July 8 of 2020 is when I started therapy. And that's when I discovered the inner child and generational trauma. And to me, it was like a whole new world of the idea of a lot of the things that you go through as an adult are a reflection of your inner child and the things that you haven't healed. And during the time of therapy, when I first started, I was very angry at both of my parents, at my family, a lot of things that I didn't understand about them because I didn't know about generational trauma. I didn't even know that they had inner children that were wounded as well. So my therapist, because she knew that I was a writer, me dejaba tarea como de escribir. Me dejaba tareas de escribir cuentos de mi mamá, poesía, letters, things like that. And these are exercises that I do in my workshops, actually. And I always say, this is an exercise that my therapist did with me and it helped me. So I want to share it with you because it helped me so much. So that's when I started, my writing started shifting from politics. And there was also a period after politics where my writing was very inspired after surrealism and like mucha fantasía. Y era lo mismo because I was going through the lowest point of my life. So I was writing in ways that I could disguise my pain and what I was going through, because I didn't want people close to me to find out about the things that I was going through, especially my mom. So I would make my writing very pues surreal, de fantasía, so that I could tell people, oh, this is not real, this is fiction, this is surrealism. And then when I started therapy, my writing shifted completely towards healing inner child. And when I came up with the idea of writing my books, I started the idea from an anger point. I was like, okay, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to expose everyone that hurt me. I'm going to expose my family, my parents, and it's going to be revenge for me. Like, like I was at that stage of grief, because it is grief. We're constantly grieving as people with trauma. Even if, you're grieving someone who's still alive or who has passed away, we're always going through that cycle. So I was at that stage of anger. And then as my therapy progressed and my own healing process progressed, I realized that my anger was, I didn't want to be consumed by that anger. So I started shifting from anger to compassion and empathy, and kind of understanding my parents' inner child, my family's inner child, and why they are the way that they are, without excusing them or justifying them, but just understanding. And so that's when my poetry started being the poetry that is now, where I write. Now I write from a place of compassion. That's why I say that they are love letters, because regardless of what happened or the pain that has been caused, I still want to understand them and see where it came from and wish them well. And I always tell them it's never too late to heal. So that is it's a lot, but that's like the timeline of my work and how it has helped me, and not just me, but also it has helped my relationship with my mom specifically, because gifting her my books and having her see the things that I never talk about with her or that I never shared with her, it helps her see me in another light. And me seeing her, understanding me and seeing me in a different light also helps me see her in a different light. So it's helped our relationship tremendously.
Yeah, so when it comes to your own healing, it sounds like, definitely therapy, writing, all of this has evolved, and initially it was used almost as a distraction from everything that you were going through, and then eventually became this art, your art, and through that you've been able to find so much healing and validation. And where in terms of how your poetry, your writing, how is it helping you at this point in your life? And in what ways is it amplifying or just helping you at this point of your life or your healing?
I think one of the ways that is helping me is, now that it's been published and it is out for the world to read, it's helping me feel less alone. I know a lot of people that read my work, they tell me, oh, your poetry makes me feel less alone. But my readers make me feel less alone, because when they relate to my work, it makes me see that there's other people with the same feelings or similar feelings, stories, traumas, backgrounds. And it makes me feel like, when all of this time and growing up and with the family that I had and the generational trauma that we had, it was very lonely. And being, the oldest daughter, being a first generation student, the first in my family to move to the US and go to a school in the US, being the cycle breaker in the family, it's a very lonely journey. So writing about it before publishing was also very lonely, because you sit with your thoughts and your feelings and you're writing this all out. And then once I publish it and I see the way people have been receiving it, y las palabras que me dejan, los mensajes que me dejan, it makes me feel less alone. So it has helped me in that way, but also it has helped me too with the concept of family. So when before I used to feel, like there was something wrong with me because my family wasn't supporting me, or there was something wrong with me because I just couldn't find my place in the family that I was born into. And then finding all these people and all of these circles and communities that support me so much, and where I can be myself and talk about these things openly without feeling judged, I started learning about chosen families and the fact that even if it's not going to ever be the same and the wound would always be there, or I hope that one day it won't, but at least for now it's still there. it helps a little bit in, knowing that there's people out there who might not be, biologically or blood related to you that are willing to support you. And now that I'm at a better place emotionally, thanks to my own healing process, therapy, publishing my work, I feel like I'm in a much better place to be able to help others and, use any of my knowledge or resources that I've gained to help others, which is why I like hosting workshops and doing poetry readings and doing webinars online, because I just feel like I'm at a place in which I can now focus on helping others, because whereas before I was focusing on surviving and staying alive and kind of on fight or flight, I don't know how you say that mode, but now
fight or
I'm
flight,
no longer, I'm no longer in that state y estoy como que más calmada, más en paz, que siento que puedo compartir alguna de mis cosas o como compartir esa luz que tengo ahorita poquita con la gente.
No, I think that is such a beautiful way to share and to show the emotional healing and progress that you've done from where you started in your, just as your, your career as a writer to where you're at now. So much healing has happened, and now you have enough to give to others, right? You have that place where now you can share it, and that in and of itself shows the growth and the healing that you've done. So in regards to where you see yourself next as a writer, or what you put out for others, or even in social media, where do you see yourself going? Do you see yourself making more poetry, writing more books, doing more workshops? Tell us a little bit about what you envision for yourself moving forward.
There are so many plans I have for my writing, and deep down in my heart, I trust fully that it can come true, just because of all of the things that I've been able to accomplish with the help of so many people and the support of so many people. So obviously I do want to continue writing poetry, and this book, my latest book, I talked about this recently, of how I put part 1 on the title page, because I want there to be more parts, just because I always say healing is never ending and never linear. So there will be more books, and I want them to come naturally. I don't want to force myself to say like I need to have this by this day, because then it won't be natural and organic. So I want to write more poetry, but I also want to my next plan is to kind of work on my I want to do like a short novel of my experience as a first generation student in San Francisco, all the things that I went through that I haven't really shared in writing format. So I want to do that, and I want to explore film as well, and I want to eventually, if I can, with the support of, if I continue to get the same support and I continue to be financially able to, I want to do workshops, but I also want to eventually help out other aspiring young writers. I have this dream of wanting to do scholarships for youth that want to be writers, like high school through college students, just because I did not have a lot of financial support. I had FAFSA, but I'm like so much debt from college because I had to get so many loans. So I want to be able to do that, and I want to do more for the community in the financial aspect if I can, just because I know that it costs money to be able. Unfortunately, we live in a society that you need to be making money and investing money in order to do these things, and especially if you're self-publishing. So I hope that in the future, si la vida me deja y si el apoyo de la gente me deja, pues poder también dar un poquito mi granito de arena a la comunidad de esa manera.
Oh, so beautiful. And so tell us about the books that you have out now. And I have both that you offer, and I absolutely love them. But can you tell us a little bit about your books and what we can expect?
So I have, my first self-published book was The Plants Are Burning, and that one has poetry. It's in Spanglish. Both of my books are in Spanglish. The Plants Are Burning has poems from 2015 through 2022. So there's 7 years worth of poetry there, but that one is I always tell people you can understand it when you see it, because it's a book that's very visual. So that one is divided between poems related to plants or fire, because those two specific things are symbolic, and they symbolize some trauma that I had either in my childhood, my teenage years, or my college experience in San Francisco. So there are poems that are titled Planta, and they're related to plant and what it symbolizes, and then Fuego, and they're related to what it symbolizes. And then at the end of that book, there's a section that is called Fuego y Planta en Nuestra Cocina, and it's 5 poems to family. And I decided to include that section at the end just because I wanted it to be a transition to my newest book, which is Here Are the Tears, I, You, and We Didn't Cry, because I had both in mind already. I had them both in my head and in my drive, but I wanted The Plants Are Burning to come out first because I wanted people to know a little bit about me and about the root of my traumas and the things that I was healing personally. So that book is a little bit more personal. So that when Here Are the Tears, I, You, We Didn't Cry, which is a little less personal, more for, families and Latinas to relate to, so that people could kind of see, okay, this is the person that's writing it with The Plants Are Burning, and this is their work, and we can kind of see. And I tell people, you don't really need to read, them in order, like one or the other, but if you want to get to know me first, read The Plants Are Burning, and then the other is more como más en general para la gente, so that it could be applied, because I do realize that many people will not relate to many of the poems in The Plants Are Burning, because it's my experience, it's my very unique and a specific experience.
Well, it tells a beautiful story, right, of pain, and so I found it just very, I loved it because I was able to get a sense of your story. And and through poetry, which is so beautiful, right, through each poem you get a glimpse of what you went through, which it helps understand then the second book, because then you have this broader, more healing approach.
So the way that I actually think about them is that The Plants Are Burning is more a little bit of when I was still a little angry, and there was a lot of anger and confusion, because these are things that happen in college when I had no awareness of inner child healing, generational trauma. So there was a lot of confusion and frustration with each of the things that happened to me and that I had to deal with by myself in a city 500 miles away from my family. And so then Here Are the Tears is kind of like when I'm coming down from that anger and tapping more into my compassionate side, when I now know that there's a child inside of me that is, wounded and wanting to heal. And I forgot to say that The Plants Are Burning has its translated version called Las Plantas Se Queman, The Plants Are Burning, where on the left side is Spanish, the right side is English, and then the Here Are the Tears, I, You, We Didn't Cry is half Spanglish and then half translated to Spanish.
Yeah, I love both of them. And there's some poems that I've heard you recite and read out loud, and it just it adds another dimension to it, because it's a story, but the way you narrate, especially on the videos that I've seen on TikTok and Instagram, the way you narrate, I find it very unique, and it's especially when you're talking about the inner child, it just has that very soft, gentle, but powerful element to it. I don't know if you've gotten that feedback of your voice narrating your poems.
Feedback of my voice?
The way you narrate, the way you recite, it's so unique and so beautiful.
Thank you. That's something that has been surprising to me, the way that because I used to upload my poetry just in written form, like on Instagram. I first started uploading my poetry on Tumblr like back in 2014, 2015. Then I moved on to Instagram. And so when I started uploading my poetry on TikTok in video and audio form, a lot of people would comment about that, about my voice. And I was like, I had never thought of it, as something that would kind of add to the poem and the way that I'm narrating the poem. So I think that's not just the content of the poems, but I think my voice was also something that helped them get so much traction and support.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for me, I came across your social media first, and then I purchased your books. And so when I read your stories or when I read your poems, I hear your voice when I'm reading,
Yeah,
which
that's
is
what people tell me. I'm like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, that's
I
so
know
great.
it's lovely, and I think it just adds to the depth of what you're sharing. So yeah, and so thank you so much for sharing and for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And for the folks that would love to get more familiar with you, your work, and purchase your books, how can they find you? Where can they go?
So I post my work, and also I announce a lot of my events on my social media, mostly on Instagram. So my Instagram is the first one to see about my events and also updates about my books and whenever I'm shipping them. So both my Instagram and TikTok are the same. They are at Vianney Harelly, the way that my name is spelled. And I also have a website that is linked on my bio. That's where I have my books, where I sell my books. That's where I also have a section of upcoming events, the workshops, readings, any kind of event I'll be a part of. I share them there so that people can keep up. And I offer workshops and readings and all kinds of events in person, but also online, just because I know there's people that read my work outside of San Diego or outside of California, Southern California. And as of now, it's not easy to travel, outside of my state, especially because I don't have a car yet. So it's hard. So I try to make my workshops also online for those that would like to still join.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. And to end our chat today, would you read a poem from one of your books?
Yes, of course. Thank you. And I have my books right here. And I will read Carta de Amor a las Ovejas Negras. That's one of the most popular ones that people really love.
Beautiful.
And so people always ask me to read that one. So yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Of course. Okay. Carta de Amor a las Ovejas Negras. This is a love letter a las ovejas negras de la familia. To those who carry the weight of breaking a curse no one before them had the tools to break. Cargar en la espalda como mochila y cemento siglos llenos de dolor. You go to therapy because you know it needs to end y te conviertes en el chiste de la cena los domingos por la tarde. Un abrazo en forma de carta y poesía para quienes por fin dijeron no. And now during holidays you see other families smiling at dinner tables and loving each other, and you don't understand why that can't be you. Es como sentir un abismo del tamaño de algún planeta. Saber que mamá y papá sufren heridas que nadie les ayuda a sanar. Your mother's inner child is hurting, but what about yours? You want something different, something better than the ways that you were raised in. Pero nadie nos dijo que cambiar las cosas nos traería tanta soledad. But remember, it ends with you, and no one after you will suffer like you and your parents did. Abrázate muy fuerte.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosachettilcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.